Welcome to the Automation Guild Live, where we help you perfect the craft of creating automation awesomeness for all your software testing and development projects. I'm Joe from joecollins.com and testtalks.com, a blog and podcast dedicated to all things test automation related. So think of me as your personal Obi-Wan Kenobi, guiding you and training you to be the hero in all your test automation efforts. And today I'd like to go over my top 5 signs you might not be working with professional developers. This is in no particular order. So the first one is your developers don't scrutinize their code. This is a big deal. If your developers just assume they understand a requirement, they code it, and they just ship it, that's probably a sign you're not working with professional developers. A professional developer really is going to try to test their edge cases, make sure that they really are testing their assumptions about the requirement, and trying all different types of things to make sure their code is bulletproof. But if your developers aren't really scrutinizing their code, they're just taking face value what the product owner told them, no one ever discussed the requirements, and they just assume that, hey, this is how you do it, and they're shipping it, then that's probably one of the main signs that you're not working with a professional developer. And also, this also can show itself as if there's an issue, and when there's an issue, your developers just start up your full application to debug what's going on, because they really have no insight on where to pinpoint where the issue could be within their code. So they really don't know where to scrutinize their code to know it if there's an issue. What they do is they end up starting a browser and going through the application as if they're a user. And a lot of times they may need to, it'd be better if they focused on a lower level way to check their code to make sure that it was working, rather than launching the whole system and have to rely on starting up a server and all those types of things. So that's one way you may know that you may not be working with professional developers. The second way that you may know that you're not working with professional developers is if your developers manually test their code. This is a big issue because developers are developers, right? They live to program. So if someone is a developer, you would think that they would have no problem creating another application that they develop to test their application. This is one of my pet peeves with test automation, when developers say, well, I'm not a tester, I'm not responsible for that. When in fact, test automation, anyone that knows me knows that test automation is software development. So your developers should be creating tests for their code. And even if they're not contributing to a test automation framework, at a minimum, they should have some unit tests in place that they're putting in to make sure that the code they're creating when they check in isn't going to break anything else. So that's a big deal. If they're a programmer, why wouldn't they program test? Why would they just keep manually testing their code rather than creating some sort of safety net almost? That's really the purpose of unit tests. They should act as a safety net. And most developers that I speak with, real developers, always say, I love having unit tests in place. And when I check in code, I have that confidence in knowing that if I break anything, that my tests are going to catch them. And these are developers. These are people that contributed to many open source communities, people I've spoken with a lot on test talks. These developers all rave about testing, and especially unit tests. So if your developers are still manually testing their code, they don't have a concept of automated test or a concept of unit testing, or if they just don't care, then that's a big sign that you're not working with professional developers. The third one could probably apply to anyone. This could apply to whether you're a developer or a tester. And by the way, all these also apply to an automation engineer, because automation engineers, to me, are developers. So if your automation engineers aren't doing some of these, I also wouldn't consider them a professional developer. So your developers don't view their job as their own personal practice. That's a sure sign that you may not be working with professional developers. And what I mean by that is I used to always see this with testers, especially testers that always said, oh, Joe, I want to get into test automation. What do I do? And I tell them, hey, we already have a license for a test tool. Here's the user manual. Here's some manual tests that would make good candidates to automate, because you're doing them over and over again. They're actually not adding any value when you're manually doing them. They're just wasting your time. So why don't you try automating this? Here's a license. There's nothing holding you back. And they would just sit there and go, well, I'm waiting for training. I need to be sent to a course. I need to take a course. I need to be sent to a college course. I need someone to train me. And that would drive me crazy. It's not up to your employer to train you, especially nowadays. If you're involved in any sort of technology, if you're not staying up to speed, you're going to be obsolete within a year or so. So you really need to treat your career as your personal practice, that it's really you providing a service to an employer and you're getting them benefits. And if you treat yourself like a personal practice, I think you'll always be employed. So this doesn't just apply to developers, it applies to everyone. But if developers don't view this as their own personal practice, if they don't take pride in what they're doing, if they believe that the company is responsible for teaching them how to be professional developers, then that's a sure sign that you're not dealing with professional developers. Number 4 is your developers don't test their code. So maybe they may manually test their code, but it's even worse if they don't test their code at all. They just throw it over the wall as if they're still developing in a waterfall model. This is a really killer of projects because I'll be honest, I'm a test automation engineer. I love test automation, but the value you get from test automation really isn't as big as if you actually built automatability and testability up front as you're creating your requirements, as your developers are starting to think about their code, and they're doing test-driven development type practices to make sure that they're testing their assumptions as they go along. If your developers aren't doing that, then I can't see how you could be successful with any test automation project, because if testability isn't baked in from the beginning, if developers aren't thinking, how can I make this more testable? Can I add a hook in here to make the tools be able to notice that this field name is a certain name? If they're not thinking about these things, if they're totally blowing off test-driven development, if they don't participate in your behavior-driven development projects, then that's a sure sign that you developers are not professionals. I think most professional developers, I know there are some controversies saying, some developers don't believe in TDD, but at a minimum, I would think your developers would be testing their code. This is a mindset that I still deal with. I had a manager saying, I don't want my rock star developers wasting time in testing. And it's totally backwards to me. A rock star developer is someone that thinks about testability as they're testing their code from the beginning as they're developing. And if they're not doing that, then they're not a rock star, and I would say they're not a professional developer. And the 5th reason why a sure sign that you may not be working with professional developers is your developers spend more time debugging their code. And so what I mean by that is they're always constantly debugging. And the reason why most likely is they don't have tests in place. So they've probably, as they're developing, they're finding more and more issues. And because of that, they're spending more and more of their time debugging things. They're bringing up the UI. They're stepping through code. And when you get to that point, I understand you need to debug code, but if that's all they do, if they're spending 80% of their time debugging code, it's probably a sure sign that you don't even have a quality product. And you probably don't have those unit tests in place that we talked about earlier that will give the developer confidence in knowing that when they check in their code, they didn't break anything. So if they're constantly debugging things, that's probably a sure sign that there's an issue. And so there's a lot of ways that you can help your developers spend more time coding and less time debugging, and help them test their assumptions about their code before it goes in production. And that's why I'm so excited about the Automation Guild. The Automation Guild is going to be dedicated to creating test automation awesomeness. It's going to be an online conference available the week of January 9th to the 13th. And there's going to be 25 sessions, and they're going to be available to people of all types of experience. So we're going to have sessions for beginners, intermediate, and experts. And they're going to be not just Selenium specific, it's going to be automation. So we're going to have sessions on DevOps, mobile testing, Appium, Selenium, UFT, LeanFT, any type of test automation or any automation in general, we're going to try to cover in some of these sessions. And one of those sessions is from Scott Nimrod. Scott Nimrod is one of the most passionate developers I know that actually believes in quality. And he really is an evangelist for this. And he's actually going to be one of our 25 speakers. He's going to have a session called Property-Based Testing. So I just want to check out one of those promos for his session. I think it's really helpful.
I told you that as a developer, you didn't have to think so hard about the edge cases that could exist within the code that you write. Running property-based tests for the options for a checker that's not a king, it exposed that my assumption of there being two positions or two options available for a checker to move, well, isn't true, right? And when that test runs, it provides you cases where that's not true, where your assumption is not valid. And then you have the ability to take action. You get to have a conversation with the business analyst, right? The client, peer developers, about what about this specific scenario? Is that covered in our requirements? You know, I just found a situation where, or a condition where this doesn't behave as we expected. And what are we supposed to do in this scenario? Okay. Gives you an opportunity again to write a test that covers that specific scenario. And that unit test is fast, right? It exposes opportunities to write unit tests that cover edge cases, right? All right, so I think I did enough evangelizing. This is called property-based testing.
So once again, that was Scott Nimrod on property-based testing. It's going to be one of our 25 sessions that'll be available to you if you register for Automation Guild, which is going to go live, the registration probably the first week or so in November. It's going to be really affordable, and I think it's going to benefit anyone that's involved in automation at any level. I think it's going to be a great time. There's going to be a lot of collaboration. I'm going to have chats going on, and I'll be live streaming like this for 5 to 6 hours every day, and you'll be able to ask questions to the speakers who I'll have live for about 20 to 30 minutes. For more information on the Automation Guild, head on over to automationguild.com. Enter your email to sign up for more information, and you'll be one of the first to be notified once registration for the Automation Guild goes live, which will probably be around the first week of November. So that's it for this episode of Automation Guild Live. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.